So far we have Matt, Cheryl, and Bill on the phone. Anyone else on the phone? Okay, in the room so far we've got Scott, Carmine, Jeff, and Costas. So we are
Copies of the minutes that you've made.
3 short of a quorum so far.
Did you lower the quorum specifically for voting in people to vote on the phone last time? I always had suggested that. So you could vote them to be allowed to be counted on the phone, even if you're less than a quorum.
I thought we needed 7 for a quorum, in the room.
Yeah,
in the
we
room.
still
in the
need
room.
7 for a quorum in the room.
You need 7 for a quorum in the room, but you're allowed to lower that by vote. So if, but in order to count the people on the phone, you first need a quorum. You can lower the quorum specifically for allowing people on the phone to count, down to whatever you want. And then once you vote them in, then they count.
Well, I'm not sure what we did, but I mean, with that, would...
I know I suggested that, but I don't think you actually did it.
Yeah, I don't think we did do that. Good. I know, how are you? Good, thank you. So,
You know, Jeff. How are you?
Hi.
Hey.
well, without a quorum, we wouldn't be able to do that right now, is
That's
what you're
true.
saying.
That's why I suggested it.
So it's kind of
when you
a
have
moot
quorum.
point until we have a quorum anyway, so I don't remember having done that. Well, you remember
The
anything
minutes
like
do
that?
not reflect that we
Okay,
did it.
so I thought we did something.
I highly recommend doing that the second you get a quorum. How many people are still on the phone?
We'll probably talk
Copy of the
about...
minutes if you're going to have them for the last meeting.
Yes, this is nice. Hey, Bill, do you know if we should be expecting anyone else in person tonight?
Well, Naval said he'd be there.
Yeah, he's here. He just got here. Is there-
Guys, this is Jay. I'm on the phone.
Hi, Jay. How are you?
Good.
Anyone else, Bill, that responded to say they'd be in the room?
Nicholas said he would miss the meeting.
Mhm.
Boba said that he would miss the meeting. Can't think of any others.
Okay. So,
I know Joyce, she didn't say whether she would be in the meeting. She said she would get back to me. She's traveling.
so Bill, do we have any formal resignations from anyone at this point?
Well, Jennifer indicated she was not going to continue. So I would construe that as a resignation.
Mhm.
Everyone else, I think, has confirmed their intent to continue.
Okay. So that brings us to 13, which still requires 7 of us present, right?
Yeah, we did take a vote, I want to say back in the October timeframe, to allow this, the establishment of a quorum via telephone.
There we go.
That should be in the minutes somewhere.
Okay, so then let's go ahead and do that, okay?
Yeah.
So there are 5 of us in the room anyway. So can we just have a roll call once again from the phone, and we'll just count you in as part of the quorum?
Sure, Jay Martin here. Navigate here.
Cheryl Clyburn Crawford here.
Bill Kilmartin here.
Great. So with the 5 of us in the room and the 4 of you on the phone, we have 9 present. So we will proceed with a quorum. So thanks to everybody for joining. Thanks to everybody for your help with the event at the State House, and especially to Carmen for organizing it and coordinating it. And I think we had a great launch of the initial report and a discussion of kind of next steps that are in line with the agenda for tonight to start moving forward on those things. Let me just say by way of updating everyone that I had a conversation with the Secretary of State's office that's required by statute to circulate the report to the relevant entities. As of early January, they had done that with everyone except members of the congressional delegation, but they indicated that they were going to do so, but they were going to do so by email. And that was the only kind of way that they were going to send the report off to the members of the Massachusetts delegation. There was some discussion about how effective that would be given spam filters and bouncing back attachments and things like that. So at the time I suggested they just send a link to the report, which is on our website, so that they can ensure everybody got it. And I'm assuming that they went ahead and did that. I did not get, despite repeated efforts, confirmation that that happened, but they did promise at the time they were going to do that. And so I'm assuming that at this point, everyone that should have received the initial report did receive the initial report. So if I get confirmation from the Secretary of State about that, I'll certainly pass that along and update everyone. But as of now, I think we should proceed with that understanding. So, so with that, moving forward on the agenda, the first item is to review and discuss versions of language for constitutional amendment. Oh, yeah. Actually, so minutes from the January 3rd meeting, let's just inject that into the agenda at the top. Were circulated online, and everyone here has, in the room, has physical copies. Are there any changes or errors in the minutes that need to be fixed? Otherwise, is there a motion to accept the minutes?
Move to accept the minutes.
Second?
I'll second.
Great. All in favor of accepting the minutes? We have to do this by roll call since we have since you're on the phone. So, Matt?
Aye.
Cheryl?
Aye.
Bill? Bill?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
I'm
Jay?
sorry, to Joe again.
Aye.
Okay. And everyone in the room? Scott?
Scott, aye.
Carmen?
Carmen, aye.
Jeff, aye.
Costas? Aye.
Noble, aye.
Okay. Great. So the minutes have been accepted, so let's just go approved. So, starting out with the discussing the language for a constitutional amendment, I mean, there are two big items here, and we're probably not going to resolve either of them this evening. But the two big tasks that remain are for the commission, which we said we would do by the end of May, will be to approve and propose to recommend language for a constitutional amendment or more than one constitutional amendment, and to talk about strategies for promoting that recommendation and adopting an amendment. So after that, we'll ask anyone in the room for testimony. We have some invited testimony as well, and that's the plan for this evening. But let's start with kind of the elephant in the room, which is the language for the constitutional amendment. This is where clearly the initial report stopped short of recommending specific language, although we did outline parameters for doing so. There are several kind of points for discussion about just how restrictive such an amendment would be, as well as how we're going to treat artificial entities and their and individual rights extended to them. Those were some of the main things that remain outstanding. But at this point, the floor is open for discussion about how to proceed on adopting specific language.
So, Constance, as we get into this topic, I'd ask this question. There are several versions of language pending in Congress.
Mm-hmm.
is there one of those versions that is particularly attractive to us? And Trevor, I think you did the initial analysis, complemented by people like Nico and Jennifer and several others of the various versions of language in Congress. Is there one of those congressional proposals that stands out?
Sorry, Bill, is that to me
Yeah.
or to everybody?
Well, it's to everybody, but
Yeah.
mainly to you,
How
because
about, it seems to me, if we picked up where we left off, there was a reason why we had the first report not reach this language question, and I think our first report wisely concluded that finding the perfect language right now by this group isn't actually what is most needed. Rather, what is most needed is us finding a process that enables a consensus and the different views that we haven't necessarily heard yet about the principles, at least, that an amendment should get to. And so I could answer that question for myself, but that doesn't really solve our problem. And I think perhaps what we could do best as a commission today for this agenda item is talk about what kind of process and what kind of people we need in the room to give us information, and over what period of time. If we work backwards from June, which is our next and probably final report, if we were to decide that at that time we're ready to make a recommendation on language for one or more amendments, what do we need to have done between now and then to get there? And I think it's not hashing out words, smithing with ourselves here, but rather developing on a minimum time frame with only a few more meetings the kind of information we need. So I guess I would suggest we do start with circling back to your question, Bill. Out of the existing amendments, is there some kind of process we can use where we extract at least the principles that are contained in some amendments that we found worthy of continuing to keep in the hopper for us? And where do we have consensus on that, right? And if there are certain principles like, Congress and the states should be able to enact limits on money used to influence the outcome of elections, that's important. And do we think it should apply to individuals, unions, corporations? That's important to know if we have consensus on that, and then we can get to language. There are other questions like that. The may or shall question is pretty important and interesting about, should Congress and the states be required to do anything, and what are the implications of that versus empowering them to do so? I think to talk about that and see where the commission actually has consensus or not, and where we have questions for experts or others, would be a valuable thing we could do in the next several months. And then I think we do need to have the corporate question wrestled down, but there's more information we need, which is why we didn't get to it. We're sort of left with, the Nico and Jen's approach, and the clear law instruction about what our recommendation should include there. And my impression was we needed more information to kind of resolve that tension, where there's a clear statement, accurate statement, I think, of this in the first report, that this commission endorses and believes that corporations don't have the rights of human beings. But I think we came to recognition that that's not the same as figuring out what the amendment language needs to be to reflect that. So I'll stop there, but I would say if what we could do best tonight and over the next several weeks is not to magically come up with the best language, but to get a process that is workable, that helps us at least get to the greater likelihood that we would get better language. And maybe it's some kind of workshop where we whiteboard and we bring in people to work with us on that. But I'll stop there.
Well, so I'll react to that just in a couple of ways. First, I don't think under any circumstances that we can fail to recommend specific language by the end of June, as we said we would. I thought it was May, but it's June, right? This commission was established to recommend specific language, and I think it would be a big dereliction of our duties if we failed to do that. Secondly, this is the entity that is going to come up with that language, and I'm not saying we should necessarily do that on our own. We can certainly, we have solicited input from the public and experts and others on all sorts of things. Clearly, getting additional input is always useful, but this is the body that has to make those decisions about that language, and we need to do that in the next couple of months. So at some point, we have to put some specific language on paper and then solicit input and feedback, revisions, ways to strengthen it, ways to improve it. Maybe that is putting our support behind an existing proposal, as Bill has mentioned, that has considerable support anyway. But at some point, we just have to move forward in a practical and in an expeditious way, rather than, talking about this endlessly and waiting to magically come up with the best language. I don't think that's going to get us very far, and I worry that we're going to be here at the end of June with in exactly the same spot. No consensus around any particular proposal, because none of us are willing to say, this is what it is, this is what we've come up with. May not be perfect, but it was the best we could do, and we're standing behind it. So I'm not prepared at this very moment to tell you what that language should be or is, but I am prepared to say that it is the 13 or 14 of us that have to come up with that, and we need to make a decision about what we think is best with as much or as little public input as we can possibly get between now and the end of, in the next few months. So we just need to move forward.
Yeah, no, and to be clear, I agree with virtually everything Costa said. What my point is to get there, we need something that's different than what's gotten us to where we are right now, which is, I don't think anybody's prepared to say what that language is. So how do we get to the point where we are prepared to get language that we are prepared to start wordsmithing
maybe
around?
the most
So
efficient.
I think the process that we come up with to, okay, June we will have a recommendation. What do we need to do now that gets us to that?
I think a workshop, a long workshop with us and maybe some invited guests, to do the workshop with, like a retreat, like a long, whether it might be like a one-day thing or longer, but if it was a one-day thing, you're looking at 6 or 7 hours, and we're with the whiteboards and this and that, and something positive will come out of it. I
agree.
That sounds like what it's going to take to get there.
Yeah.
My thought is, like, who else do we need in the room with us to help shape it? Like, to help vet it through or hear their conversations if we were to do something of that nature. Who are those think tanks? Who are those persons or people that we would want, we value their opinion, to invite them into the room with us so that we can just really hash it out?
Well, I just don't see why that group of people can't be us. I mean, that's why we were put on this board. We were all applied for it and selected because we believed we could do that ourselves. And I'm not saying we necessarily need to do that alone. We could certainly, where we need specific input, we can bring in people. But right now, we don't have anything for people to even react to. And we're basically outsourcing the duties of this commission by going to people and saying, we need your help to construct this language because we can't do it for whatever reason. And I don't think that's the case.
Well, that's not what I was really going with it, because that's not what I'm really thinking. I do think we're capable to get in the room. My thought around inviting others in, maybe it would be the second time we did it. Maybe we need to do it twice. The first time it's just us coming up with something for people to react to. But I guess I think about other people being a part of the conversation so that we can just, broaden it with people that are already on the same path. so that one, we do come up with something that's very different. I mean, we could do it ourselves, but something that is very different that would make this particular proposal stand out, this paper stand out. That's different from all the other stuff. So that's where I was going with that. Yes, I do think we're capable. We just need to, with intention, sit in the room and do it together. I believe that. And I do think we are capable.
Yeah, well, I mean, at this point, I just think that's what these meetings should be all about. These meetings, not extra meetings and long day workshops and retreats, are about hammering out these details and doing it in the context of these meetings, subject to open meeting laws and everything else, and, putting our cards on the table and putting forth proposals and seeing where there's consensus, taking votes. We may end up somewhere that a proposal that has enough support on the commission. Maybe it's not unanimous support. I don't know, but I do think that that at some point we've been beating around the bush on this question for much too long, I think, and it may not need to be language that's that different. It could very well be language that already exists in some of these other proposals, and we determine based on our own assessment that language is appropriate and adequate, and that's what the amendment should look like. And maybe it does look like one of the existing ones.
I was just going to say, maybe as a next step, what we need to do is to get a framework of a box of 4 categories. I mean, there are some categories that we would support an amendment which contain certain language. As a group, in order to get to the final language, there might be a category that we would not support an amendment that did not contain certain language. So if you kind of think of the box, or we would not support an amendment that did contain certain kind of language, and put them into those boxes, and that way we take a first vote of the commissioner and say, okay, we at least know that we would not support a proposed amendment that did not contain language. And these are on all those pivotal questions having to do with, that divide those amendments, the shall, the shall versus the may, or versus the extent to which, you get right at the question of corporations as persons. And that might be a way to break. I mean, I haven't done this exercise since the fall, but you kind of could put them into the amendments that have been proposed into 4 different kinds of buckets, or some number of buckets. And we as a commission might be able to decide that we would not support a language that did not contain certain language, or that did contain specific language if we felt that was not a productive step to get it adopted. So
This is Matt.
Go ahead, Matt.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I'll wait. I've already spoken, but I'll jump in after Matt.
I don't know, you usually have better things to say.
I doubt it. Come on, Matt. You're on the phone. It's harder to jump in, so please. You're up to bat.
Yeah, well, since I work for a biotech platform company, apologies, I'm not there in person. We have been working on all sorts of fun pandemic response, rapid efforts. But so let me go to more meta issue, which is the one we're talking about. Look, I basically have 2 points here, and my thinking has evolved, but not dramatically changed from day one. One, I totally agree with Constance and Jeff, what you're saying. We should take a stance, and we should have an opinion, and we are citizens of this country that have volunteered to do this, and we might not all be lawyers or experts or people who've dedicated their lives to doing this, but that's the entire principle of the place. So we should take a stand and come up with what we think is the best language. And I also think that we have to do something dramatically creative if we want that to have any sort of impact beyond a blue state report with no Republicans on the commission, proposing some continuation of language that, of course, all of the blue states would propose, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Which I don't personally think that that's been the spirit of this commission at all, but it doesn't really matter what I think or what anybody on the commission thinks. It's about the impression that it leaves. So I would just suggest that we think pretty aggressively and creatively about what we do to change the conversation. And the only model I have in my mind, and I am very simple-minded on this path, but is Mark Holder, Valerie Jarrett coming together for criminal justice reform, two opposite sides of the spectrum. So I might just say that we make a big effort. I literally think we should reach out to Valerie Jarrett and Mark Holder at the Koch, whatever, Koch brothers, whatever their foundation or whatever it is, and say, how did you do this? Would you be willing to think about doing this for campaign finance? Are there commonalities? Can we make this one of the similar issues? This is the only way something is going to change systemically in the system, is the two polar extremes come together around some common principles. And maybe they say, I don't want to talk about it. Maybe they say, it ain't something that fits. Or maybe they say, sure, and then we say, actually, we don't think that those are the right ways to think about the principles. But like, I just don't see another way to break the noise of the conversation other than something dramatic. We might not go that far, but like, if we really wanted to, that's kind of where my head is.
So you
Jeff?
I'm sorry.
Jeff first.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay, so I want to, I think Matt's, I hear Matt's two things as almost on how we get the amendment. I know Matt has views about what the language should say, but then there's also how we make it meaningful, defining meaningful as actually capable of being ratified and put into the Constitution and making a big difference in this country. And so I think what I was going to say still might be helpful on this. So I'm going to go back to Bill's invitation about do I have a view on existing amendments as a starting point? Because and Costas's point is well taken as well. And I think we can combine all of these ideas by saying, all right, let's look at the amendments that have already been written. There's one that is, we all know, we've reviewed them all, and they're all in our first report, HJ Res 2 in the House, counterpart in the Senate. It has 215 co-sponsors. It has, in the House, it has 47 co-sponsors in the Senate. It has been through a Judiciary Committee in the Senate. It has been through a Judiciary Committee, subcommittee on the Constitution in the House. It has been debated, vetted, beaten up, pushed around, and it still keeps coming back with all the support. So why don't we put that up? We know the criticisms. We've heard many in this room who prefer HJ Res 48 because it's harder on, or more clear about corporate rights. It says shall, not may. We can hear those criticisms. And then I think we should bring in the other criticism is almost all those co-sponsors I mentioned are Democrats. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't necessarily mean that Republicans are opposed. Mm-hmm. It means they're not, it means Washington, it means they're not. Mm-hmm. So we can bring in Republicans and say, this one has we're looking at, what would you change? Mm-hmm. What would you change about this one? And we'd have something to start with. Mm-hmm. And we could just really focus on not saying, oh, we love HJ Res 2, and we may end up there after, but really taking all the criticisms and then assessing them, but using that as a starting point. So that might be a good idea, and we would be able to frame the sort of matrix that you were talking about, Scott, as well, because that, to varying degrees, that amendment and the criticisms vet those issues. Should it be shall or may? Should the corporate rights be clearly stated, or should it be, something less? All of those. I think all of the issues would be framed around that, and we wouldn't just be starting with a blank piece of paper trying to come up with something completely different.
Yeah, thank you. Comment?
Well, no, and there are Republicans that support an amendment. Mm-hmm. So we could try to bring them into the conversation. I mean, clearly those that don't support an amendment, they're just
first of all, I think Jeff's suggestion is an excellent suggestion, and of all the current proposals out there, to me that's the one that makes the most sense, in part because it has the most support, and we're not starting from scratch, and we really don't have the time or the luxury to really reinvent the wheel here. We may not have to. We could tinker with some, tinker marginally with some aspects of this to make it palatable to more people, and maybe even attract some current critics if we incorporate their suggestions. So if everyone thinks that's a good way forward, then we could say that this is our proposal. We're gonna put our support behind this, and then identify the people who could comment on it as critics, and let us know what they think it would take to get them to support it.
Yeah, I would not go that far, at least I'm not prepared yet to say, this is the one I would support, because what I see as fatal to it is if it cannot attract Republican support, it is not gonna get out of Congress, let alone get ratified. So I would start it more as, this is language that incorporates the principles to some degree, or to better or worse degrees, that the voters of the state said they wanted. We see the following criticisms. There's not enough Republican support. Some say it doesn't do enough on corporations. Some say shall would be better than may for what Congress and the states will do. We haven't decided what we think about that yet. We want the critics to come in, and the ones we haven't heard from yet are the Republicans who support an amendment, but for some reason are not advocating for that particular language. What we can do, which would be nothing that has happened in Washington yet, is create a table where everybody can be around the table and say, here's the starting point, HJ Res 2. We really focus on bringing in Republicans and people who haven't indicated support for that, but want big reform. How would you make it better? And not have it be, we've already decided that's the right way to go, tell us why we're wrong. Instead, we're creating a table where you are at the table with your pen to tell us how we can make it better so that you will support it and we'd actually get 2/3 of Congress. That's what my proposal would be.
Anybody else want to talk?
And that's where I was coming from, Jeff. This is Joe Martin talking. That I find the technique that has been effective is you give the stakeholders something concrete to which they can react, and then you iterate, from there. And so that's why I think having some type of draft, it could be HJ Resolution 2 as the starting point, and then have the debate and do the wordsmithing based on that. So I think that's a good process, and I would support that.
I think no matter how we move forward, it's clear to me that we need some critical feedback on whatever proposal. We need some Republicans to come and tell us what they think is wrong with the current proposals and what it would take to get them on board. So we need to identify at least a few of these people and try to get them to a meeting or solicit their input somehow.
Right, and that's, I think, where Matt was coming from is, invite those folks into the conversation. I think Matt had some specific names, actually. That'd be interesting.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I would just say, when I say invite them into the conversation, I'd say it doesn't count. I love Massachusetts Republican congressmen, or Republican representatives. There are no Republican congressmen. I love the regular representatives from any given state. I'm just saying, we have to find a way to go big on that front with people that can actually impact the conversation. Because I agree entirely with Jeff, it doesn't go anywhere without significantly influential people on the Republican side saying yes.
Only thing I wanted to really add to this is that all this, and we kind of touched upon, like, we need to have some kind of, I think, in this context, have like a time frame of how and when, what stages we're going to do this in, and if we're going to have like the workshop type thing, because I think you spoke of like timing and having not reinvent the wheel would speak to that, and but I think if we're going to come up with this framework, there has to be some specific time frames as to when, how, and when we're going to be doing all this. So.
Okay. Well,
Hey, can I jump on the point that I was going to say, Jeff, on this point, do we have the list of people who are currently supporting HJ Resolution 2? I mean, maybe we talk to them and start there.
Yeah, basically it's the entire Democratic congressional representation, plus independents like Angus King, Maine Senator, one Republican, John Katko. I think we should, and to be clear, there isn't a lot of effort in Washington to, work on language beforehand together. So it was kind of the Democrats really sort of rolled ahead, and once it had 200 Democrats on board, it's hard for Republicans, even if they like it, to get on board. So I think we should use the language, but then really invite Republicans who support the amendment and Republicans who maybe don't know where they stand yet, but know we need change, to react against it and say what their concerns are and what language, to hear their critique and suggestions for improvement. And I agree with Matt, that obviously the bigger and more influential, the better. But we are working against a time frame that may not permit us to have the perfect in terms of Republicans who will weigh in on it, but we definitely need to get some in the room, I think.
Well, of course, even if they come in and they tell us we don't think money should be regulated, our hands are tied, right? I mean, we are statutorily bound to include certain things into the language of this provision.
Yeah, but there are many, many Republicans who say, I believe money should be regulated,
Right,
and we need
but they
to
might
hear
say
from
other-
them
They might
about...
express other things that we aren't able to accommodate anyway.
Right, we have our
Right?
legislative mandates still,
Exactly. So, not saying we shouldn't hear from them. I'm just saying at the end of the day, I don't know how much good it will do. I mean,
I think the most good we could do is, look, there are millions and millions and millions of Republicans who support the constitutional amendment. Many of them in this state voted for it. I would be really interested to know Republicans who think we need to have more regulation of money in politics, and I know I could bring in a few, but I'm sure others could too. What do you think of this language, and what's wrong with it? So that's within our mandate, but we're deluding ourselves if we think they're not out there, and somehow the reason it's all Democrats is because Republicans are all against this. They're not, and we need to know what language they like and what language gives them concerns, and then when they have concerns, can we address those concerns within our legislative mandate or not?
Who support? You said there's 210 Democrats in Congress that support it. So who was the dissenting? I'm assuming mostly Republicans, but I mean, I was wondering who was the biggest name out of those dissenters?
Well, many Republicans are just not taking a position. They're not dissenting necessarily. Mitch McConnell is adamantly against this, and no language will change that. This isn't. We can't satisfy that. But there are many Republicans who are sort of on the sidelines because it's not. There's not a vote. There's no reason for them to take a position yet. So I think it's not necessarily Republican members of Congress, but there are in Maine dozens and dozens of Republican legislators who voted for this amendment. It passed. Again, not the specific language, but this amendment passed the Wyoming House, which is almost all Republican. It's very strong in Alaska. I mean, it's strong in Wyoming, as I said. There are
unanimously passed in the Tennessee committee.
Tennessee, yeah. So there's an active conversation among Republican state legislators and increasingly some in Congress on this issue, and I think that would be good to hear from them.
well, do you think we can identify those folks and try to get them here for our meeting on April 7th?
Yeah, or at least, and if not that, I'd suggest we share the language without labeling it as HJ Res 2 or anything else, and invite them to, they could give us written feedback, they could give us telephone feedback, we could get specific, I mean, and that way we could send it out a lot wider, to a wider group.
Okay. Well, I think as a first step, that every commissioner should look closely at HJ Res 2 and then bring forward to the commission any concerns that you have about it or problems, whatever you think we need to look at closely. Is there any part of that specific proposal that you would change, and for what we should have a conversation, see what we would change ourselves about it. And then, if not, then propose it as, maybe not kind of formally adopt it, but as our working draft of what we would be inclined to support and solicit feedback from critics. And, I mean, we could do that now if you want, or we could do it at the next meeting once everyone's had a chance to read it and think about it.
Time to digest a little bit.
Okay.
You know, that's my.
Okay, so then why don't we put it on the agenda for the 7th then, that we will discuss HJ Res 2 specifically and take up any modifications to it that we would want to see. And hopefully by then, Nico in particular will be able to weigh in with any specific objections or concerns he might have. I think he's been kind of instrumental here in helping us sort through with Jeff some of the constitutional legal implications of any specific language. So I'll reach out and try to get him to weigh on it in particular. And incidentally, the specific language of this resolution is already in our report, the initial report on page 21. So everyone should be able to find it pretty easily, but I think Jeff is trying to send out another version of it.
I'm going to try to just put an unbranded,
yeah, great.
Straight up language. Yeah.
Okay.
So at the end, it could be that our conclusion could be that we as a commission, after having spent the amount of time that we have doing that, support a House resolution for which there's already 200 Democratic congressmen who have signed on as co-sponsors to that legislation, and that would be so we would be affirming that they know what they're talking about.
Actually, my proposal is we try to solve the current problem,
Right.
which is it's all Democrats, by saying,
Like that, going around.
let's get this
around.
feedback, and then we may come up with, I hope that we would come up with some change language and say, based on our work, if we make these changes, we will attract an actual winning number of
Is there any
members of Congress.
language that is expressly supported by a larger bipartisan? I mean, has there been proposals that have been made at all to compare that don't have some of the language that
No, there's
HRS 2 has?
no, there hasn't been. There's no.
I think that's unlikely to come out of this polarized Congress anyway without some major
Yeah, I'm not
breakthrough.
thinking from Congress, but by
Yeah.
any others, any other sources that would be in opposition to that, or would be shaped, differently that they would point
I
out.
think that's where we can actually have some impact if we succeed in doing that.
So is there a conservative think tank that's taken this up that has a strong position on it that we could reach out to for some specific?
Well, I talked
Cascado
about,
or
the
any-
Institute for Free Speech is
Yeah.
basically against an amendment of any sort, so they're not going to be particularly constructive. And I
But we
don't
should still
believe, but
talk
we
with
should
them
ask
so we
what their
can understand
concerns
why
are.
they would be
Yeah,
opposed to it. right?
exactly.
So
Yeah.
they might be worth reaching out to.
Yeah. Matt, do you have other suggestions?
Well, I would just say the Institute for Free Speech, I've read some interesting stuff, and Cato and others, but I think if you ask the question, why are you opposed? And then if you get the right environment, get the right person, I've had good conversations in the past on other topics and read cool stuff from this guy, Jeff, you mentioned to me, Alan Dickerson. I think if you pose the question as, okay guys, if it had to say something, what would it say? Like, what's the most basic thing could it say? And then just get them talking about it. That's the way to frame the conversation. Nobody's going to reject, okay, you could have an amendment that says no foreign influence or no foreign payments in elections. Everybody's good with that. Okay, so that's like a starting point. Obviously, it's 120% from where we need to be, in my opinion. But I think if you find a couple of these folks and have that conversation, say if it had to say something, what would it say? You might have a chance of starting a real conversation.
Lindsey Graham, by the way, has spoken out several times against Citizens United from all the way from when it first happened, all the way just through.
Lindsey Graham has said a lot of things that
Yeah.
seems to
I'm
have.
not necessarily holding out hope, but it wouldn't hurt to try. Well, we are also.
Thank you.
There's amnesia.
Which Lindsey Graham? Okay, we digress. Any other thoughts on how to move forward with this? So the plan of action is for all of us to review HJRS 2, to think about who we might bring in as critics or opponents, so we can get some understanding of why they're opposed to it, and to think about think tanks or others who could give us some additional input on their opposition.
And I'm thinking of having people come in who would like an amendment.
Yeah.
But, you know, I mean, people that are just completely opposed to any amendment, it'd be a waste of time.
So I just circulated the language, and I titled it Amendment Language to React to. I didn't include HJRes 2, because it would be good if we just separated, oh, I don't like it because it's that one that is in con. So, and just the language, and I think, let's react to it, but let's circulate it to people who can individually give us reactions that then we can bring back to the commission.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Any other thoughts on this item on the agenda? Okay, let's move on then. So the next item is to talk about concepts to develop the strategy for promotion and adoption of a constitutional amendment. So here the initial report was a little more clear about specific steps we propose. I guess to achieve some of those proposals, we would need to think about what it would take to do all the things that we suggested should be done. Article 5 convention, citizens convention, or citizens, whatever we called it, as well as kind of getting congressional support for moving forward with this. So not sure where to start on that list of things, or what this commission really needs to do, except put forward a plan for what should be done. I'm not sure, you know, without continuity and without resources, how much we can actually do as a commission to see some of these things come to fruition. We may be willing to on our own time, or if we get some resources, but I don't see too much of that happening between now and June, especially because we have to still iron out these other details. But I'm open to ideas for what we might do.
So on this topic, Costas, I'm going to throw out a couple ideas to
Yeah.
get the conversation rolling. Yeah, we've heard that there are many other states that are similarly interested. So I think that we should, you know, get some type of outreach. Yeah, we need to know, like, to whom we need to outreach. Basically, reach out to the other states and say, hey, this is what we're doing in Massachusetts. Are you doing something similar in your state? And if so, can we talk? And open up a channel of communication. And so the action there is, like, who do we reach out to open up that channel of communication? So I'm just going to put that out there as a suggestion.
Okay.
Well, there are, you know, other states that have passed resolutions, passed amendments, sent them to Congress. You know, legislators that worked on those amendments may still be there to reach out to, and they'd be likely candidates to communicate with. I mean, maybe others have left the legislatures in those states. People leave, but yeah, there'd be obvious people to reach out to. Take a look and see, you know, who were the sponsors, co-sponsors of those amendments that got passed through those legislatures, and those would be obvious candidates to reach out to.
I agree, Carmen. How do we get those? How do we get those names?
We might be able to we might be able to, at the Social Law Library in Boston, they may have a way to do that, to discern that. I spent a couple of days there. Also, reaching out to we can identify the legislation, and then once we identify the legislation, probably the House or Senate clerk and at those legislatures in those other states could identify who are the sponsors of it if we can't get it through. We should be able to get it on the internet, but you never know. I mean, some of these legislatures, they only meet 4 months a year, or I mean, there are only a dozen or 13 legislatures that are full-time in the United States. The rest are really part-time. I go to Texas, they meet 3 months every other year. But we don't have to worry. I don't think Texas put forward an proposed amendment.
So one thing that we could do is we could either try to coordinate this ourselves, maybe try to get some resources around it, or work with an existing national organization that operates in this space to organize a conference of some kind to think about how to strategize for adopting the amendment, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if we're talking about bringing in players from all over the country, we're talking about a fairly substantial event where we all should be involved in the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we need to do this in a centralized fashion and bring people together, probably physically. So we could work with a group like yours, Jeff, or go to something like the National Conference of Money and State Legislators,
State legislators.
That might be willing to do something like that and to reach out to the people from the various states and bring us together and think about how to move forward.
Yeah.
I think one of our invited testimony is going to comment on this, and Greg's given this a lot of thought as well. But my sense is it's sort of like the last topic. If we're asking ourselves, what can we do between now and June? How do we get the most leverage for a recommendation to actually be meaningful out of this commission? I would go with where we are, which is, we've already recommended some form of Citizens Congress. That was in our first report. So what is it that we would recommend to actually make that meaningful? And I think it would be to answer the questions of, who does it, who's there, what's it likely to cost, and then I think we'll realize pretty quickly, well, it's not going to be this commission doing that. Should we actually, which I believe we should, go back to the legislature and say we have a very specific path forward. If the voters have made very clear they want Massachusetts to lead on this, the next step is some form of successor commission that will have a budget to actually make the Citizen Congress happen, and have the American Promise will help with anything to make this go forward. It I think would be more effective to be able to use networks like the the National State Legislatures Associations, but to have it be a body that's been sort of recognized by the legislature of Massachusetts as authorized to go out and pull all these people into Boston for some national meeting.
Well, it might not be in Boston. I mean, it might be.
Well, yeah, exactly. That would be one of the things that this successor
And I would
commission with a budget.
I would almost rather it be, some type of nonpartisan association that is.
Well, the National Conference of
It
State
is.
Legislatures is
Exactly.
nonpartisan,
Yeah.
and they have
Yeah.
meetings all around the country.
Yes,
They have
they do.
meetings in Boston.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they would probably, they might be willing to take this on to bring the key.
Yeah. And maybe it's
stakeholders
4
together.
regional meetings,
Yeah.
and it's a whole program, but it would, Massachusetts could lead by
Yeah.
putting some money behind it, creating a commission to make it happen, and then getting the sort of people who have the networks nationally to help.
Yeah, and this is Matt. I couldn't agree more with that. I think it's a pet interest of mine also to establish something in perpetuity, or at least for a period of time, in legislation, and then separately, this is a topic that if you're going to have a Citizens Congress, whether it's Article 5 or just like short of a Citizens Congress, a gathering of people, what are the other topics? Like, this is not the only congressional or the only constitutional topic we should be looking at.
Well, We, at the same
By the
time,
way,
at
I
the same
feel
time, we
like-
don't want to open up a can of worms and to
No, no,
deal
no,
with
no.
every reform under the sun
Hold on.
and lose momentum
Yeah.
around this one specific thing we've been tasked
Yeah,
to.
I disagree a little bit, Costas. Let me finish. Like, I'm probably one of the top proponents in this commission of keeping a very limited purpose for what we've been asked to do by the voters of Massachusetts. And if legislation were to be proposed by this commission and we were to write that legislation, I would be a strong proponent of thinking about the expansiveness of that legislation. That's all. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, so do we need more discussion on this topic right now, or where do we?
Oh, well, related to this, Costas, is we've asked now a couple of times for face-to-face meetings with the governor, the attorney general, secretary of state, president of the Senate, speaker of the House. And I've done that, through letters and emails, and have, I think we need to have those meetings here in Massachusetts. And we need to take the temperature of those 5 officials and, find out if they're supportive and if they have ideas and if they're willing to help or they're not, or whatever, So I'm thinking that we should become more proactive and aggressive in trying to get those meetings. Wanted to put that out there for reaction by the other commissioners.
Well, I mean, I think that's a great idea, and I've been supportive of trying to get those meetings, but at the end of the day, if we go to them, they're going to want to know what they're putting their support behind. And if we go to them without some decisions about things like specific language that we're proposing, they're going to hold out because they're going to want to know, what are they really supporting? And so I have not been too aggressive in pushing for those until we know exactly what we want to do and what we're behind. And there are at least a few major gaps in where we are right now as a commission on some of these deliverables. And I think it will be much more effective to solicit that kind of support and think about moving forward once we've actually finalized everything that we were supposed to do as a commission, and right now we just have not.
Can I suggest a way to maybe bring these together? Because I think we don't need to ask them for support for a particular measure right now. I think our very specific ask, which would come under this heading of how do we advance this amendment, and related to the first part about language, could be, you got our report, great, now we have an ask for you. Here is draft language to react to. Would you send it to your 50 counterparts and ask for their feedback? So would you send it, so would Governor Baker send it to the 50 governors, the 49 other governors, and say, please run this by your chief legal counsel and give us your feedback? Now, we might not get it, but it's a beginning that conversation across states. And then, the Secretary of State has the same thing, the AG. I don't know if the leadership would have the counterparts of that kind of network, but basically say, here's our report, here's draft language. We're going to be recommending language by the end of June. Please give us your feedback on this draft language by April 30th, something like that. So that's a very specific ask, and it seems to me that is totally in the spirit of what the voters and the law says, which is it expects the elected officials to not just read the report, but to actually help advance the amendment. They may say, well, what do you want me to do? Well, here's one very specific thing that's not that hard to do. They've got communication channels already. So that's what I'd suggest, that we do push for these meetings and we have the specific ask. And if we're not getting them, at some point, charge our communications committee with, raising the temperature a little bit and say, the commission has done this work. We've been trying to get meetings and, we need our elected officials to get behind this.
Sure. No, and there is a speakers association. There's Speaker of the House in Massachusetts. There is speakers of the House in the other states. There's only one state, I think, that doesn't have a bicameral legislature, and they have annual meetings, if not more often, at least annual meetings. So I suspect, I don't know, but I suspect the same thing with Senate presidents. So that would be a good idea, and all they would have to do is send it off for comment.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, yeah. That's a good idea.
I do think a lot of this stuff just becomes easier once we settle
Yeah.
on what we want our language to be.
Mhm.
Because then we could be out there, you know,
Yeah.
in a proactive way.
Yeah, send something concrete for people
But
to
this
react
helps
to.
us settle, because if we get 49 responses that say, oh, that language is horrible, it's gonna kill free speech, doesn't do enough on corporate, whatever they say, that can actually help us get to
That's good
final
feedback.
language,
Yeah,
right? Because
yeah,
if we,
that's right.
otherwise, you know, now I don't think I would love it if we got 49 responses,
Yeah,
but we might get 10.
Mhm.
And if we get one from, you know, Texas, that actually gives us some meaningful, I just made up a state, you know?
Mhm.
It's otherwise something we don't have now, and it can help us get to final language.
I'm glad you said Texas.
Yeah, right?
Great.
Yeah.
The first state that introduced our resolutions.
Fort Bliss.
Well,
Fort Bliss.
so that sounds like a good suggestion by Jeff. And so, Bill, we'll keep pushing for these meetings, and if we get them to, you know, maybe generically, we can do that for a little while, but once we get some draft version, whatever you want to call it, and we send it to them for specific input, I think we can make another ask for a meeting and for specific input at that point. Okay. Okay, great. All right, in the interest of time, I noticed the agenda said that we were going to meet until 7 tonight, which we've already blown past by a few minutes. So let's just get to the testimony, because there's at least one invited testimony for tonight. So if there's no objection, I'd like to move to that item of the agenda. Great. So maybe we can ask you want to come up here and take a seat, introduce yourself to the commission, and I'd like to ask you to make sure that you send us your testimony in writing too, so that we can archive it properly.
I'm John Walsh. Thank you very much for inviting me tonight. Let's just hear my voice.
Yeah.
I'll make 3 points to briefly introduce myself, talk a little bit about a business perspective, which I bring, and then finally talk a little bit about some of the my perspective on next steps as you've begun to articulate. First, my background is in business. I was part of the team at Staples that grew the company from 3 stores to a few thousand. I'm also, since then, a serial entrepreneur. My last company was Internet of Things company, tracking medical devices around the world, sold out to Cardinal Health a few years ago. I'm currently the CEO of ProfitIsle, which is a big data analytics company, helping large corporations improve their profitability. So I am deeply embedded in business. I am passionate about capitalism and its capabilities, and I'm also very concerned about the change in the capitalist environment due to the money in politics and the distortion of money into marketplaces. I've done business around the world. I've done business in Russia, I've done business in Saudi Arabia, in the Middle East, and when I start to see business in the United States look a lot like doing business in Russia, it disturbs me greatly. And I've talked to many CEOs who have a very similar perception, which is, if I can buy a politician easier than I can build a new market, then people start to buy politicians. And if that's the environment that we're in, it creates massive market distortion, and the concept of capitalism starts to lose its meaning, and it starts to radically impact the ability of the United States and its people to innovate. And I'm a passionate believer in innovation, and when we see these concentrations of power distorting marketplaces as well as government, I am getting active to try to keep that from destroying what I love, which is the capital system, and I've been a beneficiary of it, and also someone who enjoys innovation, and I'm very much dedicated to that, and what I perceive as the American value of innovation. So to that end, actually, Jeff and I co-founded American Promise a few years ago, and that was my first foray out of business and into an advocacy point of view because of the issues that I've seen in the distortion of the markets. So that's why I'm here. I can very clearly attest to the fact that many business people feel the same way I do. which is they are very strongly in favor of innovation and competing effectively in the marketplace, and the distortion of money buying policy changes, buying and selling what's on the import tariff lists, and making that level of non-market-based changes to the environment is really deeply concerning to people, but in an environment where that's happening, in order to compete, people end up having to basically play the game, and to not fail, they end up getting sucked into a systemic process, which is really where we are right now. And without some fundamental changes, like a constitutional amendment, we will likely continue in this until we hit some other form of economics that won't look like the capitalism that we all expect. So that's why I'm very involved in this. That's why I believe very strongly that many Republicans and many business people also feel very strongly about this, because they see the same thing, a different point of view perhaps, in the sense that as much as they care about democracy, I think a lot of them care about capitalism. And at this point, capitalism as we know it doesn't exist without democracy. And the distortions of markets associated with governments and their radical impact on both tariffs and policies and reaching into markets is what a lot of people that I know who you would consider to be Republicans, I consider myself to be an independent, but I certainly have strong Republican tendencies, as they have historically been articulated. So that's a perspective I wanted to bring. But also the other perspective is I'm a systems person, so I look at the world as systems. And when I see a problem that seems to be intractable, the first thing I do is make it bigger. And that sounds like a little bit contradictory, but it turns out that if you make the problem bigger, you have more degrees of freedom to solve it. And in this instance, when I look at the Commission and what you've been charged to do, I applaud the fact that you're doing this work, and I'm very excited about it. One of the recommendations coming out of this Commission could be to make this bigger to solve the problem. And you can do that in ways that you've already suggested. The first thing is involve other states. So we lead Massachusetts, but one of the opportunities is to reach out to other states and say, this is what we're thinking, let's get other perspectives. And so we're making it bigger by engaging the other states in our republic. And the other one is to make it bigger by asking them what else they want to do to amend the Constitution to address the concerns that they see from their point of view. Both of those I see as very near in, and certainly part of the opportunity for suggested next steps and a way to go back to the legislature. You've talked about both of those things in context. When I hear that, I hear you solving a problem by doing what I would do instinctively, which is, if I have a problem I can't solve with the current givens, change the rules or change the scope. And I think that's what I really think is a great output of this commission, is to bring a point of view, which is, here is language that this commission has recommended as an input into the next round, which would be adding the additional states, the articulation of inviting them to this dialogue, and also asking if they, in their states, have any other constitutional amendments that they are talking about. I think both of those seem to be well within the scope of the conversation we're having. It both, at least in my opinion, meets the objective of what the mandate was, but also allows us to move forward in a way that will likely and more likely achieve a positive outcome of some type of broader engagement and a national level movement forward on a constitutional amendment. So I'm strongly in favor of a citizens commission through asking our legislature to both fund and recommend a way forward to do that with the sponsorship of the Commonwealth, and also engage either with the commission or, if appropriate, other institutions that are like-minded and want to support that. So that's what I wanted to bring, and I thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you very much.
Any questions?
Thank you.
I think so. Thanks, John.
So, Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I just wanted to, I think I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up, 5 other states have adopted, similar language for an amendment. And we're considering that in Massachusetts now. So I'm thinking, it might not be too much to ask to have the commission members take a look at House 3208, which we have in the legislature now, that states, Vermont, California, Illinois, New Jersey, and Rhode Island have already adopted the same language. And take a look and see if that's something that we might get behind or not.
Would you be able to circulate that to the commission?
Oh, sure. Yeah, sure.
So we can take a look at that,
Sure.
and we'll add that to looking at HJ
Okay.
as to.
Yeah, thank you.
What is the process? Where is it in the?
So now, I think on February 27th or 26th, it went to, February 26th, it went to the House Steering Committee. It had been favorably passed through the Federal Affairs Committee, and now it's in steering. So a bill stays in steering for less than 30 days and goes to another committee. It could go to the Committee on Bills in Third Reading, which is the last committee before it would go for a vote. If it doesn't come out of the committee in 30 days, then it's like, it's sort of like in a bad limbo.
Yeah.
So I'll be trying to have it move into third reading from where it is now. And there are a lot of bills that go into third reading. In any given session, there might be 200 or 300 bills that end up at third reading and die. But
Was it passed by all 5 of those states in the exact same format?
So I believe the relevant language, the answer would be yes.
They all have the same.
I just borrow that for a second.
Specifically referenced each other, but they don't have specific language of an amendment in there because it's not part of the convention process.
So, okay. All right. Similar elements. I mean,
So really it was to move forward on a convention, not
Yes.
to propose specific language?
That's specifically for the convention process. Under the convention process, there's debate among scholars about whether or not the states can pass a convention called with specific language. Since there's debate,
Right.
we left it out there.
Yeah. Okay, so that's really about calling for a convention, not about specific language.
Right.
Which we could
well,
do both.
it calls on the Congress to propose an amendment that provides, has specific provisions.
But calling for a convention is something that as a
And in the
commission,
absence-
we've already done.
Right.
Yeah.
And in the
So
absence...
this bill would be consistent with what this
With what-
commission has already
Right.
recommended to the legislature.
Correct.
So there's no inconsistency there.
There you are.
Good. And we should probably support
Because,
this
for example,
we called for it.
if this commission recommended to the legislature
Yeah.
to pass this
Yes.
legislation...
Well, I think in spirit, we
Yeah.
pretty much already have.
Yeah,
So
so
we
I
should
think-
go on the record and get behind this specific bill.
Yeah, and that's what you're asking, right?
Yes,
Yeah, so
yes.
I think
Yeah,
that
okay.
that's, I agree with Costas, we already have.
We've already
But
done it.
not specific, with specific reference. I think
Uh-huh.
if there's anything we can do specifically that would help move it in the legislature, like maybe if there's testimony,
Mhm.
the co-chairs or one of the co-chairs goes and
We could release
reports.
a public statement.
Or
I mean,
we
if
release- yeah.
if you're willing, I'm not sure kind of what the timeline is here, right? If we could do this between now and our next meeting, but if we vote as a commission to support this, then we could make a
That
statement.
would be good.
We could make a statement.
Yeah, I would welcome that.
I hesitate to do that without even having read this, but we can maybe do it by our next meeting, or we could do it now if you.
Yeah,
if
the
there's a time crunch.
operative part of it is about a page and a quarter.
Okay.
Which, yeah.
I mean, I don't know what you think as a commission. I mean, are you prepared to officially vote to support this?
Oh, you're asking me? Well, I guess I would say, I would suggest something like, that Carmine immediately, or after, as soon as possible, circulate the language, specific language of the bill to all the
Sure.
commissioners, but that if needed, and I'm not even sure it's needed, I think we could vote right now on a motion to the effect that, the co-chairs are authorized to report the support of the commission for a convention as indicated in our first report to the legislature in support of this legislation And if after reading any of, after reading the specific language of the bill, if any commissioner objects and would like to hold it till the next meeting, we could do
Okay.
that, but something like that.
So as
where-
I hear it, you're making a motion to empower the co-chairs to communicate support for this bill after everyone on the commission has had a chance to weigh in on it by raising objections. And if there are no objections, to go ahead and express our support for it.
Well, said better than I did,
Okay.
yes.
Very well. Okay,
That's
so is
it.
there a second to that motion?
Second.
All right.
Yeah, I'll
so-
second that, Kilmer.
Okay. Any further discussion? Okay, let's take a vote. Scott?
Aye.
Carmen?
Aye.
Jeff?
Aye.
Costas? Aye.
Noble, aye.
Okay, on the phone, Matt?
Aye.
Cheryl?
Aye.
Bill?
Aye.
Jay?
Aye.
Great. Okay, so that passed unanimously. Carmen will circulate the language, and then if you will let us know within a day or two if you have any objections to anything in there, we will note those objections, and if we hear no objections, we will put out a statement. Bill and I will put out a statement that the commission supports this bill. Great.
All right.
Thank you very much. All right, we have time for maybe just some very brief public comments, if anyone wishes to say anything here. Okay, go ahead.
So the commission that you guys want to hold, there's no particular reason you need legislation for that.
Mhm.
You just, because it doesn't have any official power, all you need is buy-in from politicians from all around the country. Wolfpack already has all the contacts that we'd be happy to help you guys establish with like Republican primary sponsors of our resolution in states like Texas and Tennessee, South Carolina, as well as Democratic primary sponsors in quite a few of the blue states, New York, and all over the country. We'd be happy to help you guys make those contacts. Wolfpack has been wanting to put together something like that. I don't think we have the bandwidth to do it, but it's something that we'd be more than happy to help you guys to do, or help another group to do.
Great. Maybe we can help each other to
That'd be
pull
great.
something
Yeah.
like that off.
Thanks, Sam. Could I ask if it's, unless any commissioner objects, that would you send the language, and I'll be happy to send you a copy of the language to react to that we talked about earlier today, to your Republican contacts in those states that you mentioned, and just ask them to give you feedback that you would share with us on that specific language. Sort of apart from the convention issue, just what do you think of this language? And
I can promise that I will send that to the group that makes the decision. I expect that the answer would be yes, but I can't promise
Great.
yes until I do.
yeah, and if you'd rather, and if it's easier, share with the commission or me just the contact information for those Republican legislators, so we can get there and we can send it directly to them from the
It's more likely
commission.
that we would send it on for you because there's.
Either way, just we want to get more input on
We'll be
that
meeting on
language.
Thursday, and we can add that to our agenda to meet on Thursday and give you a decision.
Great,
right after that.
thank you very much. Yes, sir.
Okay. Listening to that, I had a thought which I'd like to share with you.
Just identify yourself
My
again
name
for
is
the
Tim
purposes
Hassel. I'm a
of...
member of We the People, Massachusetts. The issue seems to be concerning corporate personhood or legal entity personhood more generally, that the members of organizations' constitutional rights may be trampled upon if it is said that the legal entity that they belong to does not have constitutional rights. It seems to me that we believe that money is not speech, and that money should not buy influence. And in many cases, these memberships, as in the case of a stockholder in a corporation, consist purely of pecuniary interests. And we should perhaps think about the same spirit in trying to resolve when the members of a legal entity have their constitutional rights will be protected, and when, in fact, they shouldn't be, because all they have is a monetary interest in the outcome. And it seems to me there's a clear criteria for making that decision out there, which is limited liability. If the legal entity that the people are members of grants them limited liability, then it's pretty clear that they have only a pecuniary interest in it, and in this case, definitely we should not be bothered by the fact that their constitutional rights may not be respected or identified with that, those of the corporation, I should say. I see one small problem with it, which is that the concept of limited liability is a creature of statutory law. You don't want to reference statutory law from within a constitutional amendment. It's also, I don't even think, federal statutory law. But nevertheless, it seems to me that language could be found which made it very clear what the intent was and which essentially resolved the issue along the lines which I've outlined here, I hope clearly enough. And that's my 2 minutes. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
I have a prepared statement. It takes 3 minutes. Is that all right?
Yes.
My name is Paul Lowenstein from Sharon, Massachusetts. Like Tim, I'm a member of We the People Massachusetts. Following the Philadelphia...
Folks speaking to the phone. Sorry.
It's a little harder to hear the speakers.
Should I
but you
come
can
forward so you
yeah.
can hear? I don't want...
Yeah, that's fine, right. Yeah.
That's good.
Okay, I'll
Great.
just do it here. Following the Philadelphia Convention in 1787, a lady asked Ben Franklin, "Well, doctor, what have we got, a republic or a monarchy?" "A republic," replied Dr. Franklin, "if you can keep it." According to the dictionary, a republic is a state in which supreme power is held by the people and their elected representatives, and which has an elected or nominated president rather than a monarch. Ben Franklin misspoke when he answered the lady. He should have said, "an oligarchy, if white male landowners can keep it." Over the ensuing 2 centuries, Americans changed our political system to be more inclusive, participatory, and responsive to the will of the people. We gradually extended inalienable rights to people of all colors, sexes, and financial means in order to better approximate a republic of, by, and for the people. Unfortunately, over the past several decades, 2 damaging Supreme Court doctrines have emerged to reverse much of the progress towards Republican self-government. In 1976, Buckley versus Valeo redefined political spending as a form of speech protected by the First Amendment, rather than a megaphone that can be regulated to ensure that everyone's voice can be heard. Then in 1978, First National Bank of Boston versus Bellotti extended First Amendment speech rights to artificial entities, effectively redefining corporations as people with constitutional rights, rather than merely useful legal fictions. Subsequent Supreme Court decisions, such as Citizens United versus FEC, have reaffirmed these 2 doctrines. As a result, powerful special interests now use their mighty financial megaphones to obstruct the passage of public interest laws designed to ensure that for-profit enterprises first do no harm, such as climate change and gun carnage. And when powerful special interests object to public interest laws, such as Massachusetts' ban on cigarette advertising near schools, or the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act, or Montana's Corrupt Practices Act, the Supreme Court nullifies them based on the constitutional rights of artificial entities. The government we have today is not so different from the oligarchy of white male landowners of Ben Franklin's era. If we genuinely aspire to Republican self-government dedicated to addressing the legitimate needs of the people, while at the same time protecting the inalienable rights of every citizen, we urgently need a strongly worded 2-part constitutional amendment that nullifies the 2 Supreme Court doctrines at the heart of the problem. The We the People Amendment, HJR 48, would accomplish this by reserving constitutional rights for real people and requiring regulation of money and politics so that we all, rich and poor alike, have an equal voice in political affairs that affect us all. Thank you for listening. I
Thank you.
appreciate
You'll
the
send this-
opportunity.
you'll
I
send
have
it to-
copies
will you
and I
also?
can email it as well.
Great, if you could email it to Jeff, that would be
I'll be happy to do that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Carl.
All right, thank you very much. So I will just remind the commissioners that the next 3 meetings will be held on April 7th, April 28th, and May 12th at 6 o'clock. If we need additional meeting times, we will revisit this issue, but for now, those are the dates that you can plan on, and we've reserved this room, and that will be available for all of those meetings, so that we could...
Could you give those dates again, please?
Yes, April 7th, April 28th, and May 12th.
Do you have a time of day for those yet?
6.
6
6
o'clock.
6
PM.
o'clock,
Yeah.
all three.
Yes,
And here,
in here. Yes.
Can I just one other thought.
April 7th, April 28th,
And May 12th.
Wyoming came up tonight. There's a gentleman who lives in Wyoming named Ken Chestek who's offered to testify. He's been to some of the conferences in Washington that Jeff has organized. He's a law professor at the University of Wyoming. And if the commission would be interested in hearing his perspective, he has agreed to testify electronically as we did at a prior meeting.
Sure. I don't think there'd be any objection, so if you could try to help us coordinate that for April 7th.
April 7th?
Yes.
Okay.
We should be able to ensure we've got the technology to do that.
Okay.
Okay? Great. All right. I think that's it for tonight. So is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Motion.
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye. Oh, we got to do a roll call.
Do it
Roll
by
call.
roll
Roll
call.
call, yeah.
Scott?
Aye.
Comment?
Aye.
Jeff?
Aye.
Costa's aye.
Noble,
Duval,
aye.
aye. On the phone, Matt?
Aye.
Bill?
Aye.
Cheryl?
Aye.
And who's left? Jay?
Aye.
Great, we are adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
hadn't changed the rules to allow you to have a quorum by phone, you wouldn't have been able to adjourn. You've been here all night.
All right, thanks very much,
Thanks,
everybody.
Okay. If I write up my suggestion, so it will transform this into the record.
Your suggestion, your feedback on the...
Well, my suggestion, how to resolve this issue of when it can be seen that the constitutional rights of the members of an organization.
Yes, I mean, anything you want to submit will be circulated.
I have to think, it
Absolutely.
really just
Yeah.
occurred to me here tonight.
Yeah.
Just give me
Yeah,
a-
please do. Please
there is
send
a
it.
criteria.
Thanks, Tim.
Thank you.
Should not say it.
All right.
What you're saying, and the innovation piece, the professional innovation that occurs when